Business of Higher Education podcast. Today, we're joined by Stephen Perelgut, who is a computer engineer, a computer scientist, spent the majority of his career working with IBM, and since that time has gone on to teach computers and programming to different groups of students at different institutions. So, Stephen, welcome to the podcast. Thank you very much for making the time to speak with us.
Glad to be here.
Yeah. So, Stephen, my understanding is that when you were at IBM, at least for a portion of your career, one of your duties was that you looked to try to create partnerships, create alliances with other private sector companies. I'm assuming to create additional revenue streams through which IBM would provide professional development, professional training to those other companies. Is that correct?
Yep. Mostly what we were working with was smaller companies. So it's a, long and checkered career. The nice thing about large companies is if you're not worried about becoming the CEO at some point, you can carve your own path. So I pretty much didn't do the same thing at IBM more than 2 years in a row. And I
Really?
did over a 27 plus year career there. I started writing COBOL compilers. Ended up in something called the Center for Advanced Studies for many, many years. And that's where I learned to build partnerships. Most of those were with academic partners, but always open to working with whoever the academic partner also worked with. Occasionally a large company, but frequently it was smaller companies that didn't have a lot of resources but had interesting challenges. And that led to the sort of last phase of my career at IBM, which was working with mostly startups, early companies that had made it through that early startup phase. And what we did is we gave them access to IBM technologies. We built courses to help them understand how to best use those technologies. We ran hackathons and similar. And the idea was that some of them would grow large, and the ones that grew large would be growing large on our platform.
Right.
So,
Right.
strategy.
Strategy, yes. So that experience, what I am particularly interested about that experience is that post-secondary education in Ontario and Canada, around the world, has been going through a lot of changes for some time, but particularly in the last few years. And I think that many institutions are looking to create perhaps non-traditional sources of revenue, and that I think that they're doing that through trying to create partnerships, alliances, programs of the type that you were creating during your career at IBM. Um, do you know? Can you speak to the what is going on in academics in terms of these types of partnerships?
Yeah, there's a lot. It's not enough actually, but there's a lot. Uh, Part of it is the government, Canadian government, particular Ontario government to some extent, some of the other provinces have programs that support this, that mostly on matching grant basis. If a company's willing to invest X, and if they're willing to put in-kind contributions of up X or more, and if the academic partner is willing to put academic time and resources roughly equal to X into the equation, you can usually generate 2 or 3X out of public sector.
Hmm.
And the result, well, the big win, the capper for me, it's about almost 15 years ago now, is something called the Southern Ontario Smart Computer Innovation Platform. And we built that. It started it started because I was on campus at the University of Toronto, and the Dean of Science, Arts and Science, invited me to meet the um, chair of the Department of Near and Far Eastern Studies.
Oh,
And the request was simple. We need somebody to tell us how to do databases, and we need a machine capable of running a really big database with pictures and images and sounds and everything that you possibly could want to capture. And I came away from that going, wow, that's like the 10th request I've had for that this month. And had a chat with a friend who was the government relations person at the time, who dragged me in to see somebody who was sort of the emeritus president of IBM Canada. Uh, he had retired from that to probably only working 60 or 80 hours a week for the company. And I actually got time with him. I got told, you have 15 minutes. And the day of the meeting, I was told, well, he's going to be late and he's working on a $100 million deal. So we're going to have to pull him out early, but we'll give you 5 minutes. So I had prepped ahead of time, knew all about it. I met him once before. His one of his many geniuses is if you met him once before, he knew you. He knew everything about you. He remembered the time you met him 10 years ago, shaking his hand at a cocktail party with 8,000 people. He would remember you. He's a genius. Anyway, cutting that story pretty short, went into him and said, I would like IBM to donate mostly in kind through software and access to technology, 100, $200 million worth of goods. And I think we can generate $1 billion worth of R&D in Canada.
wow.
And he said, okay, basically that was it. And then that ball got rolling. I gave it over to people who were much smarter than me in dealing with bigger numbers than I dealt with. I didn't deal with those numbers. Um, I really ticked off his research assistant, by the way, or his executive assistant that day, because our 5 minutes took a half hour because he just wanted to talk about this.
Right.
So
Right.
$100 million deal waited a half hour. He still got the deal. He was that guy, but I got his time. Anyway, long and short of it is SOSIP still exists to an extent. It's wound down quite a bit now after sort of a decade of running successfully, but it has done over $1 billion, getting close to $1.5 billion worth of R&D in the province of Ontario, partnering universities, companies, IBM, and the government supporting it. The federal government came in with $40 million, I think, in the first tranche.
Wow.
The provincial government came in with 20 up front, and I think another 20 eventually. And then the second tranche was almost as large. So there was a lot of funds that got put into this. A lot of IBM technology got used. Um, the advances University of Toronto made with solar power, one of the, if not the best, one of the best solar power solutions in the world, came out of research that consumed wild amounts of high performance computing. A lot of the climate change research out of the University of Toronto, which is world leading, came out of that. Waterloo quantum computing, just incredible. Queens with health science work, which is still going on. And it linked up and partnered with all the high performance computing offerings in the province. So those sorts of partnerships work really well. The challenge is when you start working with the small companies,
Hmm.
or the inverse, when there's a really good idea and you've got a professor or grad student or postdoctoral who wants to take the really brilliant idea and monetize it. And
Okay.
that's your challenge.
Okay. Can you speak a bit about uh, the challenge there and why that's a challenge and what are elements of trying to solve those challenges.
Yeah. So the focus of all that research, even today, is around high performance computing. I'm talking about computing that's equivalent to sort of 1 million laptops, maybe more. Um, some of the, well, certainly the biggest computers in Canada, some of the biggest in the world, and taking on big, big challenges. But then what do you do? So now you've found a new way to put, I think it's titanium oxide onto a different platform in order to capture the energy out of solar energy. What do you do with it? How do you turn that into a company? It's not the type of thing that a professor of physics or professor of computing is capable of doing. You need to build a factory. You need to do material sources. You need a global supply chain, marketing, sales. You need a big organization. So it works if you're partnered with a big organization, right? You partnered with IBM. You do something in the financial sector and you're partnered with RBC or Scotiabank or you those sorts of construction, you're partnered with OMERS. These companies all know what to do with big ideas. But with smaller companies, they come into this and they go, I just needed the power to analyze this. I needed to understand what was happening. Uh, there was one story outside of SOSIP, but related. The researchers were closely related. One fellow from University of Ottawa, and Calgary, now many years ago, decade ago, a little more, had floods. They were so bad that they were going to shut down the Calgary Stampede, and they dealt with it.
Can't do that.
Can't do that. They solved it. They were ready to go with the Calgary Stampede. And this group of graduate students, a couple of undergrads, got involved and they were looking at Twitter feeds and they were like, just randomly, one of them, I think, was going out to the Stampede and was like, what happens in the Stampede? And discovered that there was this whole negative thing, all sorts of negative comments. And when they did the analytics, and they needed a lot of processing to do it at the time, they're pretty efficient now, but at the time it was a big deal. They discovered that there were some people had nothing to do with Calgary, had nothing to do with the Stampede, were just randomly posting rumors that the water supply was poisoned. You couldn't shower in the hotels because you would die.
Hmm.
Those stories. So these students reached out to tourism in Alberta.
Mhm.
Took a while, got through to them, used some IBM executives to reach out and open some doors, and got in to tell them that the this was happening. And they tracked it down, and then they did what they do. They built a campaign, and they said, "Don't worry, the water's fine. We're all good." Did they save the stampede? I think so. I mean, who's going to know? But
Right.
they made a company out of it. It's still going today. It's not a huge company, but it's doing a lot of business with analytics, mostly on the East Coast.
Really?
Yep.
Really? East Coast United States, East
No,
Coast Canada,
Canada, East
East
Coast
Coast
Canada.
Canada. Okay. All right. So now one thing that I've heard you talk about when we're talking about maybe not exactly these types of partnerships, but where post-secondary institutions, be they colleges, universities, are trying to provide services, trying to create groups that will help the public or companies and bring in some money, which is particularly important these days, given recent moves by the different governments. One thing that you talked about at one point was it the triple helix? Can you explain that as it relates to post-secondary institutions creating partnerships that bring an income to the university or college with either public sector, other public sector, or private sector institutions.
Okay, yeah, it's actually fairly easy to describe the theory. There's a whole story and a lot of research behind it these days. The theory is that when you take the public sector, government, the private sector, industry, commercial organizations, and the academic sector, and you bring them together, you get a positive feedback loop, which just makes everything better all the time. Uh, there's a very strong argument that most of economic growth in the world ties to this triple helix, that it's
Hmm.
when the three components are functioning well together. The government provides programs which encourage industry to grow. Industry reaches out to academia to say, we have these challenges. Can you help us address them? Academia comes back and says, hey, by the way, we've got these other things you might be able to do. And industry says, that's great, but there is some risk behind these things. And we need help offsetting the risk. That as a company, we can take a certain level of risk, but we can't take all that risk. IBM, 20, 30,000 people in Canada. Well, now it's split to the two companies, but between them, 20, 30,000 people. Um, any of the large companies would be in the same scale. You're not going to put that many jobs at risk, but the government doesn't want them at risk. Not only
Mhm.
that, but in many cases, what we tracked down for the government was the fact that an investment of X would grow and generate, 10x sales, 100x sales, would generate 10 or 100x of salaries, and good paying salaries. Computing, the marginal tax rates are getting up into the 50% range.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you can generate 1,000 jobs,
Hmm.
making $100,000, that's $50 million of tax, right? Spread between provincial and federal, whatever, but there's $50 million. If the federal government can cause that to happen by investing 5 million, don't we all win? And
Hmm.
that's that helix. That's that constant spinning. The government figures out what to invest in, uses that to offset the risk for the companies. The companies reach to the academics, find the next good risk, or the academics reach to the companies and say, we've got some ideas. We think you could use them. So that's that triple helix.
So I think you can anticipate the next question, which is, I mean, that sounds really good, and it does happen, and it continues to happen. But when politics enters the the equation, um, what has your experience with that been?
Good and bad. It's a mixed bag like everything is. Um, the we live in a world where everybody wants the solution instantly. We want our
Hmm.
instant gratification. And for some of these things, you invest 5 million today, and 3 years from now, you start to get the payback. And 5 years from now, you're paid back. And 6 years from now, you're now benefiting, right?
Hmm.
That's part of the risk that the government is supporting within the organization. But politically, years 1 and 2, you just threw money away. You put it into
Hmm.
this thing that what's it doing? Where's the money coming from? Um,
Well, in those 5 and 6 years,
yeah.
you're looking at an election in there, and
Yep.
yeah.
And so we had that. It's actually interesting. Something I was involved in the East Coast in Nova Scotia, in particular, was building another one of these consortia. The major universities, the Nova Scotia Community College, which is a massive
Right. Yeah.
province expanding, system. And went in there, And we told them they're going to generate jobs, they're going to generate things. IBM needed certain skill sets that were not being trained in the province because they were brand new tech and there weren't teachers that were trained. So IBM said, if you will support this, we would like to do some research with these researchers, but we'd also like support to develop programs to teach the teachers so they could teach the students the
Hmm.
latest technologies. And about 2.5, 3 years later, government minister who had not been very supportive at the time, not
Hmm.
that we ever said anything about that, but stood up in provincial parliament and announced that IBM had hired, I think at the time, 800 people,
Wow.
um,
That's
built an entire center in Bedford, Nova Scotia, just outside of
yeah,
Halifax.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Beautiful little place. I'd been
yeah.
there
It's
a number of times.
nice. Yeah.
Super secure, high performance, all that stuff was in there. Had brought bank partners in, which put more people into the building. And at the same time, provided jobs for top tech talent in the province. So mom and dad were a little nervous that their kid was going off to Dalhousie, St. Mary's, NFX, whatever, and studying computer science because it meant they'd have to go get a job in, ooh, Toronto. Yuck.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
Calgary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's where they all went. Or worse, they'd have to go south into the
Right.
US.
Right.
And instead, they went to Bedford, right?
Hmm.
Mom is happy, dad's happy. Uh, they become grandparents and they're even happier.
Right.
And we had stories, and a lot of people were happy about that. That's that effectiveness of working. But it's a hard sell to the government because the government's got to commit on paper up front. They've got to make investments on a regular basis. And the payback is 2, 3 years down the road.
Hmm.
So, like you say, if there's an election in the middle of it, it can be challenging. Luckily, those two big things survived the changes of government.
Hmm.
So,
Right.
you know,
So just concluding, winding this up, kind of back into the something I wanted to focus on is uh, what is your view? We have lots of institutions in Ontario, in Canada, that maybe are not immense universities or colleges. They may have a very, very specific type of focus. They may not be, you know, research universities. They're research universities, but not at the same scale. Um, some may have been colleges not that long ago and community colleges and now are polytechnics or uh, for these types of institutions who may not be doing the kind of deals you're talking about that you did and that you described. Um, what type of partnerships, what type of uh, uh, affiliations might they try to create to generate money to offset declining student enrollment, declining funding, when they don't have the resources of everybody can't be, let's say, the University of Toronto, right?
yeah.
So, what is your view of the path in terms of these partnerships and growing partnerships for these other group of post-secondary institutions?
Okay. So I don't can't really speak a lot toward the enrollment issue. That we both know the issues that are going on right now, and the government's approached all of this. But in the research sector, things go from the very large to the small.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we have what's called the Tri-Funding Council, the Natural Science Engineering Research Council, the Social Science and Humanities Research Council, and the
Mm-hmm.
Canadian Institute for Health Research. We also have the National Research Center and the National, I can't remember what they call it these days, but the large consortium models. Those are all looking to fund things at the $25 million range. But in all of that, there are many, many programs that are designed specifically to work with the colleges and with the oops, sorry about that. I'm going to edit around that. They're going to work with the colleges and with the smaller universities, the non-research universities, undergraduate universities, we call them. And what they're going to do is support them possibly in building a center or even just on an individual student basis. So one example, Sheridan College has a center for mobile computing. Uh, I know that one intimately because when I was IBM, I helped write letters of support to help get off the ground. They got $2 million. They're still running the center 10 years later. They're
Mhm.
partnered with the health sector out there. They're partnered with the hospitals that are growing all around Mississauga and Burlington area. And they're doing wonderful things. Worked around mostly mobile computing, but that's the focus of that center. Cybersecurity centers are growing up. There's a nice one up against the University of Ottawa right now, which is world class and everything. The Sault College, relatively small college, has a partnership with MyTax. It's an
Mhm.
organization that was originally math and information technology. It's spread across everything. The goal of that partnership is to take students who are very advanced, end of a undergraduate, possibly into a graduate degree, depending on where they are, and partner them with companies that need to bring those skills in and match the salary.
Oh,
So my tax says if you can put $7,500 in for 4 months, my tax will put $7,500 in for 4 months. You can put more in if you want. My tax will give you up to 7,500, right? So that's a $45,000 a year salary. If you're a student who's taking a work term away, professional experience here, whatever you want to call it, that's not a bad deal.
hmm,
It gets you into things and it gives those institutions a reason for doing that.
right.
There are many other programs. There's ones that will fund a student working with the academic institution to build new programs, to build new training, things along those lines. The thing is, people don't look for them all the time. Even the colleges struggle to find somebody who can shepherd these programs through. Years ago at IBM wanted to run a program for advanced students coming into IBM similar to this. They didn't know about these programs. And I pointed out, given the scale of what IBM wanted, if IBM was going to put $100,000 in, government would put $100,000 in, they could hire these students. We did for till I left IBM.
Wow.
You know, it's an investment from the company, but you're getting two for one. I kept saying you're not getting half price, you're getting two for one. You're going to buy $100,000 worth of students, get another $100,000 free.
Right. So, as part of this, then, in post-secondary institutions, there there is a need. There's an ongoing need. I'm sure these people have existed for some time, but right now, I think particularly, there's a need for people who have these types of skills working at the post-secondary institutions in terms of building those partnerships, and you know, with more than just one, you know, private sector or funding agency. So that is so what kind of skills do those people typically really need to hit it out of the park and bring in that money for the university and college?
Some of it is just a bureaucratic mindset that you've got to be able to deal with. These are government run programs. There are many, many I's to dot and T's to cross as you go through them. They're not hard, but they're time consuming.
Mm,
Um, some of them are driven by the political wins. We had one project that died because you were an excellent project. You were going to be our second choice, but we already had our first choice in Ontario and we couldn't give another one to Ontario. Painful way to lose a fight,
yeah, yeah,
but it's the reality of the game. So you have to have a little bit of tolerance for that. And then perseverance in digging through. They're not well advertised. They're not hidden. They're just not well advertised. And understanding, being a little creative. The terms are obscure sometimes. It isn't obvious that it fits here or there, but go after it. Go reach out to the people who are running the program. Uh, some of them have huge challenges. At one point, I know my tax was supporting 3,000 students in a year,
really.
and they had a challenge from the government to push that up to 10,000.
Wow, wow.
Um, think about how that is to grow. Think about what that means in a country the size of Canada,
Right, right.
right?
Yeah,
You know, we're
absolutely.
we're talking about a measurable percentage or two of all the students in university in Canada being funded by this to work with companies. They're there. The programs are definitely out there.
Mm,
But universities have to devote people to it. And again, if somebody starts today, the first partnership is going to be 6 months or a year from now. And growing it to a place that matters. I mean, $2 million for Sheridan was probably 3 years of work for three people, not full time, but significant portion of their careers were being devoted toward that. Big risk. What if you did it and the government said, no, we already did one in Southern Ontario. Sorry.
mhm.
Right? What are you going to do?
Right, right. So, yeah, that's really interesting. And yeah, like, so if you were, so right now we have a lot of uncertainty in higher education in Canada, and there's uncertainty around the world in higher education. If you were to be advising, uh, a smaller, mid-sized institution on first steps to try to build a new revenue stream uh, of funding, what would be the first things that they would do?
The first thing would be to focus on the strengths of the institution.
Mm-hmm.
Don't build a mobile computing center if you don't have a sizable computing service. Once you've figured out where your strengths are, investigate what funds are available and look at who's competing for those funds.
Mm-hmm.
Once you've got that, you can now start to plan out an attack for how you're going to approach that. Which ones are you likely to win? How much are you going to invest in effort? Are you going to hire somebody to put together a proposal, to put together 10 proposals? Um, are you going to bring in somebody who's an expert to consult with a faculty or a department or an individual researcher? That'll increase your probability of winning the grant. How much is the grant worth? What are the strings attached to the grant? A lot of these programs in Canada like to partner you with somebody from the industry side. It's very effective. It's a great way to grow companies in Canada. But if you're going to do that, how are you going to do that? What's your strategy going to be? So that should be the way it goes.
Right.
And by the way, I
Right.
think I noticed we got about a minute
Yeah.
left.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Stephen. This is uh, a very timely topic in higher education, and really appreciate you sharing your experience and expertise and knowledge. And